Welcome everyone, and thank you for being here at the Vivian Poems street photographer Vivian Meyer virtual poetry launch. I'm Deborah Bell, the publisher at Radiant Press. We're an indie press that began in 2017 when we saw that there were few traditional publishers left in Saskatchewan. And we wanted to make sure talented Saskatchewan and Canadian authors had the opportunity to be heard. We are pleased to have published Bruce Rice's book, The Vivian Poems, this year. Bruce is currently the Saskatchewan Poet Laureate, and this is his sixth book of poetry. And we also are welcoming a special guest, poet Linda Monahan from Prince Albert. Linda released a book with Radiant last year called A Beautiful Stone, which I think you will also enjoy. Bruce will be reading excerpts from his book, and Linda will be asking him about the poems and about his writing process. We appreciate your support as we navigate the virtual world of book launches. After the reading, we'll have a live Q&A with Bruce, so please join us for that. You can post your questions in the comment section of the event on our Facebook page at Radiant Press. We would also like to acknowledge that we live on Treaty 4 territory, homeland of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and the Métis Nation. We are committed to creating space for marginalized voices and publishing Indigenous authors. We're offering a special deal on Bruce's books in June. You can purchase 3 of Bruce's books for $30, and those include Life in the Canopy, The Trouble with Beauty, and The Vivian Poems. Linda's book is also available, A Beautiful Stone. It's on our website, and you can order those at radiantpress.ca. Delivery is free anywhere in Canada for the month of June. Thank you to our funders, Creative Sask, Canada Council, and Sask Arts. Thank you for coming to the launch. Here's Bruce and Linda.
Thank you, Deborah. First, let me say congratulations, Bruce, on your new poetry collection. It's an intriguing and insightful book, and I've really been enjoying the read. So congratulations.
Oh, thanks very much, Linda, and thanks for Radiant for putting it out there. This is what it looks like. It was quite an adventure putting this whole thing together. Trip to Chicago and to see a gallery and a show of hers in Toronto as well. And I've just missed the thing in Calgary, which was canceled, or basically the Glenbow Museum has just finished a show there, but by the time people see this.
Could you give us a little bit of information, Bruce, about how you came to be interested in Vivian Meyer, the American street photographer, and what captured you about her story?
Well, Vivian Meyer, which is spelled M-A-I-E-R, worked as a nanny, among other things, for well-to-do families in Chicago. But I first heard about her when Stephen Bulger of the Bulger Gallery in Toronto had just acquired about 14,000 or so of her black and white negatives, and I heard him being interviewed on the CBC radio, and that got me interested because so much of my work is inspired or grows out of art anyway. And so that started me looking at it, and then as I dove into it, the story grew. And Vivian Meyer is not famous. Sometimes she's called the mystery nanny because even the people that she worked for had no clue about the volume or importance of her work. And so it wasn't until her work was acquired in a storage locker auction in 2007 that it was first posted. And she was by this time in her 80s, and it really broke open in 2009, which is, unfortunately, she died that year in poverty, and now the photographs are going for thousands of dollars per copy, and there's been over 60 international exhibits, 2 major documentaries, and so forth. But a lot of the inspiration for the work came from 2 things. One is it sort of captures American history at a certain point of time, especially the 50s and 60s and all the turbulence that was, and early 70s, although she photographed right to the 90s and all the turbulence that was going on then. And a lot of it has echoes of what's happening right now. And but also she was a very private person, and a lot is made of it. There's been a lot of mythologizing, and people forget what the life of an artist is, how much of it is either solitary. And as Shelley Banks, who's a photographer and poet here in Regina, says, does anybody imagine that the Bronte sisters, who worked as governesses, shared their novels with their employers? Probably not. Uh,
Exactly.
and a lot of it is just, she was not a naive person. She was basically self-taught, with, although she did have some instruction. And she was able to produce this incredible body of work. And
Yeah.
with
She was like a best kept secret, wasn't she?
yes, she was. And part of it she wanted, I think part of that, she guarded her work, I think. And part of it was she was a kind of person who was not, sometimes could be difficult and abrasive. She had a sense of humor, but she was
Uh-huh.
very definitely a feminist, and um, I think very sympathetic to the civil rights movement and things like that. So when her family
Right.
she was babysitting for would be off at the lake, at the beach, she would go down the road to Black communities nearby and photograph there. But
Ah.
she's a fascinating character,
Yes,
very
and
complex.
I was interested too that in the preface to the Vivian poems, you say that the poems are a translation of what she left us, and that Vivian would object, but you hope they are as true to the art and who she was as an artist, as such a thing can be. So, why do you think that Vivian would have objected to your poetic translation? Because she was such a private person?
Well, I think like any significant artist, I think she was concerned about managing, and she had no say in which of her subjects got portrayed, which photographs would be put up. She had no, all of this that's happened with them. She had no say in any of that. And so I think that was part of it. But surprisingly, if you look at all the books and all the material, there's not that much on the individual photographs. Everything is supposition and how an artist might have worked. And so with these, a lot of the poems in this book are based directly on the photographs, and there's some fiction, there's fiction involved here, but
Sure.
they're reading the photographs and what is in the mind of the photographer and some of the subjects, and what is going on in the times. And so I've tried to salute, basically pay attention to the work itself and where
Oh,
that took me. So a kind of response, but it's a translation of the photographs, and there's other translations, of course, but it's
right.
also kind of how I tend to work quite a bit.
Yeah, I found it to be a real honoring of her work and a very much an honoring and a sensitivity to the artist that she was too. So now on to the poems. The first poem in the collection is Vivian writes her own prologue, Making a Spy. And that poem gives us a glimpse, I think, into her early years and how she became the photographer that she was. I was wondering if you would share that poem. And in it also, Vivian says that she has to be on guard. So she was always watchful, even from an early age. And I was wondering if you could read the poem and then speak a bit about that need she had to be on guard.
Okay, sure. And so instead of writing the prologue to this book, I had Vivian write her own prologue, and it's
Why not?
an easy way out. um, but she sometimes referred to herself as a spy, and in front of the book, you'll see she used different names on her birth certificate, her passport, even when she went to drop off her films to be developed, and all this type of thing. And so this is when she's about age 3 or so, and she came from a fragmented family, and her family's broken up, and her mother went to live with a woman who was actually Jeannie Bertrand, who was a photographer and actually a very prominent or promising one, but who happened to be from the same area of France where Vivian's mother was from.
Mhm.
And so this takes us in the imagination back to the place in New York where they lived. So it's called Making a Spy. This is me ready. One needs to be ready. This is my father. He leaves with a suitcase, takes Charles with him. Papa brushes me away as if he were brushing dirt from his pants. Charles' case strains, hits the back of his leg so he pitches ahead. And now my father drags the tangle of himself, Charles, and the cases into the hall, the window over the stairs squinting as me and Mama watch them leave. Are they leaving like Papa says? Are we moving? Pour un temps, Mama says. For a while, I'm not stupid, old enough to know that half of me is on one road, not a good one, and half of me is on another, also not good. And I recall quite clearly for all the things he did. This is when I decide to admire my mother less and my father more. This is me four. Me, Mama, and our bed in the apartment of Jean Bertrand and her frayed sapphire dress. She has a habit of looking into reflections. White peonies laid on the mahogany stand. Her finger traces the gleam on the table as if she were writing. She's French, like Mama says, quite sternly I'm to call her Madame, which makes her chuckle when I... We have a bit more food, cream for tea, and mustn't waste it, sausages on Sunday. Madame Jean, Mama, their stories slip into the space under my door, like one wave waiting for another. They think I'm asleep, talk about men. Papa, of course. Married men are single, no different. Drawn up like a weight she's been reaching for and finally found. Madame Jean says her secret, the baby she has given away, like Charles. I must be on guard. I never knew people owned more than one camera. Madame Jean must be rich. The pantry is full of them, little machines I look into and aim at her. But she's not smiling like I expected. The walls have been cleared to the baseboards to make room for photographs, black frames in immaculate rows that round the corner. A surgeon who never paid his bill, then a country doctor. The one she likes best is three workmen in clothes they wore that day. She makes me guess, how old is this man whose beard uncoils like a white river with a shirt for a sandbar? The women are different than Grammaire. They face each other on opposite walls, and Madame Jean says she heard them whispering just before she came in. She means it. It can't be real. A camera that fits in a matchbox. Madame Jean folds it out like an accordion, but won't let me hold it. For the rest of the month, I trail my fingers on the wall and push the door as I walk by, but it's always shut. I never see her go in. She calls me Little Miss Mata for Mata Hari, which she explains is a kind of spy girl, so don't get shot. The merry-go-round in St. Mary's Park knows me as Skinny Froggy. Kids make this up, then flick the air with their tongues like they're catching a fly. I never trust anything that can be taken away. I have a name, Vivian. Is this true? I haven't decided.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's a lovely visual poem, that one. Really enjoyed that. So talk a little bit more about Vivian's need to be on guard.
Yeah. Well, I think she lived in a kind of a serial statelessness her whole life. Both her parents were immigrants from France. Uh, Her brother Charles was a bit older. She was born a few years before the Depression. And when she was 6, her mother took her. Her father basically, by the time of the 1930 census of 31, had already left the scene, and they were living with Jean Bertrand. And Then they went to France for 6 years. She lived there from age 6 to 12, and she would have heard only French the whole time. So she comes back to America, back to New York, but it's a New York she knew only as a child. And then she spent some time there, and she does sort of works. It's a little bit hard to track what her work history was there, but then she has a small inheritance, goes to France, and her whole life she moved from place to place and was dependent on other
Mm-hmm.
families. And because her family was so fragmented, she didn't seem to have the kind of connections that other people have. But I'm very careful about this because I think there's assumptions about how much connection she did or did not have, but there were 5 lockers full of her stuff. So we don't really know what was there. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
the people's memory, the people she worked for had little memory of her family or anything, that kind of contact. But that isn't to say that there wasn't
If
some
there
connection
wasn't.
at least.
Yeah.
But she lived a very precarious lifestyle. That's for sure.
Part of the mystery surrounding her.
Yeah, yeah. But I think she was her survivor, and I think, like many children, and in that situation, have to learn at a young age. So
Yeah, to
yeah.
survive. Well, in your poem, A Necessary Question, there's another poem that I feel that gives a lot of insight into Vivian's worldview, as well as wonderful poetic snapshots of her work that, as the poem says, fixes itself in your mind. And when I was looking at a number of the photographs of Vivian Meyer or Mayer, I know I'm saying it wrong,
Meyer,
Meyer,
and it's spelled
so many
Maier. And there's a
Maier.
great website. The John Maloof has a website with a lot of her. Actually, one of the most comprehensive websites of a photographer's work that I've seen, or at least certainly a large sample of what's in the books. Yeah.
Okay. And would you read A Necessary Question for us, please?
Sure. And necessary question comes from the idea of necessary and sufficient causes. And don't ask me why this dropped into my head, but a necessary cause condition is the things that are necessary for a thing to happen. So it's kind of about what is
Mm-hmm.
necessary to make all this
Yes.
happen, including being human. So a necessary question: what makes us human? Only a rich person would ask such a thing. Even an ant knows what it is. Are you an ant? Maybe God put us here. Maybe it's luck. I'm like that Dane who deduced how electrons work, that we can be streams or waves at the same time. He kept a horseshoe over his door. Of course, I don't believe in it, he said, but I understand that it works whether I believe in it or not. As for the world in 6 days, from the shape we're in, I believe it. First, we chip stones, attach them to spears. Soon, given our nature, we'll blow ourselves to smithereens. We're no better than monkeys digging with sticks. Does language make us smart? I've had better conversations with birds than I have with some people. Better stick with a horseshoe. But humanity, that's the real question. I'm a difficult case myself. Sometimes I wonder why the universe bothers. I walk, I take pictures with my beautiful Rolly. How many faces pass through the lens? 10,000 faces? 10? I never thought to count the people clinging to doorways, posts, and each other. A Negro boy wearing Mickey Mouse ears looks directly into his future. A picture like this fixes itself in your mind. But why? I should be terrified. I've seen the tableau of an accident, certain appalling acts, but also this exhausted Canadian mother who cradles her son, royal blue stag knitted crudely into his Siwash, blue for a sleeping boy, something his people made by hand. His pretty mother is not a Madonna. She'd be a woman like me if I weren't single. I saw a statue with lines and a movement like this in St. Peter's. The stone, transparent. This mother is too, but most of us don't think of ourselves as works of art. My Rolly shoots from the waist. Through it I see like a child who's not very tall and from whom much can be learned. Digging graves is a job and often quite pleasant. We seldom think of the birds and the sunshine. There are a few kinds of punishment, 100 kinds of shame. Whatever happens, we cool off with Kool-Aid. A man removing his shoes in a park is memorable. A boy who has never heard English can look over broken slats of a fence, pickets topped with peeling fleur-de-lis, and we can tell by his gaze that in some places the only language left is on the graves. It's a full-time job. In some other life, you can call me broken, but one thing I know, water is a mirror. If in spring God were to walk by a puddle in Battery Park, even he would pause to look at his reflection. But what could he do? There is too much to fix in 10,000 lives. All we can do is put up with it. It's why I never ask people to smile. Myself, I don't ask for anything.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Bruce. In this poem, you have Vivian ask what makes us human, and she says only a rich person would ask such a thing. So in looking at many of her photographs, I was struck by a certain empathy that I felt that she has for the underprivileged, and a disdain for the wealthy, the befurred and bejeweled. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I would actually take it beyond sympathy. I think that they were so close to what her life was that I don't know that she had the kind of distance that you'd ordinarily think of with a photographer, and that's always the question I think for street photographers. People think street photographers, it's just about going out into the street and finding some dramatic thing or evocative thing to take a picture of. But it's really a lot about engagement with the subject matter and what is it that moves you. And when you think of Vivian's life and how she was constantly on the edge of poverty, I think she identified with those people, and that was part of her background. And I think she was able to make a connection despite the fact she was a rather tough person.
Mm-hmm.
I think the people she was relating to or taking photographs of got that, and for sure she was very aware of her times, and the writing about her doesn't pay much. You will hardly ever see the word class mentioned. And you know, when you
True.
think of Vivian, she never had a chance to go to the New York school, which is where Diane Arbus went. She couldn't have walked into a gallery with a portfolio.
No, of
What
course
chance
not.
would she have had? And so I think she always saw herself as other, and I think that was part of that identification.
Mm-hmm. The befurred and the bejeweled were the people that she worked for.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
probably sometimes, although I think she got along, actually, it varied, but I think she was, I think she needed, I think she got a lot out of living with those families. When you listen to the children,
Mm-hmm.
she gets mixed reviews.
She certainly
uh,
does. They either loved
yeah,
her or hated her, it seemed like.
yeah, exactly. But when you listen to the children, one of the families, the boys in the family, actually helped her out right up until the very end periodically with rent, and they tried to get her phones which she wouldn't use, and
Oh,
I think she even was invited to their weddings. And actually it was a couple of the boys that when she died, scattered her ashes on this ravine in a film where she used to take them to get strawberries, and it's on the
yes,
John Maloof
yeah,
film. You'll see part of that.
yeah, yeah. I thought
Yeah.
that was a lovely a lovely gesture, because she did
Yeah,
take them there to pick strawberries. Yeah.
yeah, but she was tough too.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
she was.
adventurous.
Uh,
Adventurous
yeah,
is yeah.
yeah. Many of the poems are, I'd like to talk a little bit about voice now, because many of the poems in your collection are in Vivian's voice, and yet there are a number of them that are the subjects of her photography. For example, the voice of the furniture mover, and in the poem The Kiss, those are poems in the voice of the subject. So I wonder if you could share those poems, and if you would, I'd be interested in knowing how you worked out the voices, various voices in the book.
Mhm. Okay, here's a furniture mover, and it's quite a famous one of her famous images. And there's a mover with a long, narrow mirror that he seems to be moving in and out of a building. And Vivian is caught in the image reflection in the mirror with her camera. And so anyway, this is the furniture mover. Hey, Lady V, you're stuck in my mirror. Don't worry, lady, I'll get you out. And hey, what's this? A smile? You said you had it in you, but I didn't believe them. Still in the mirror? Put down that camera. Smile, Lady V. And this is the kiss. Uh, and these are from the New York proof sheets. And there's 9 poems, because proof sheets, when before digital cameras, there'd be either 9 or 12 images on the sheet. But anyway, this is one of those. Kiss. Under the 8th Street awning, we reach for each other, drawn and tormented in a small bright skiff, spun in the mouth of a river when the gods are silent. We fall apart and dissolve like pages of yellow fiction, the shambles of everything we hoped passion would be. We've thrown our bodies away, the kisses we've met bent, a crease in the solitude. Yeah. So the
And so how
voice.
did you come about coming up with the various voices? How did you make that decision to write some poems from Vivian's voice and others from the subject matter of her photography?
Yeah. Actually, before I wrote, before I started writing, long before that, I used to do improvised drama, which is all about getting into a character's head. And so when my first 3 books of poetry are all in the voices of characters speaking. So in some ways, doing this in this book is coming back, because the previous 2 books were more meditative in tone and more in my voice. But
Yes.
so it's actually like second nature to go into these voices. And just part of it was the research too, to be able to put me there. So I did go to Chicago, and I looked at a lot of films, not just Vivian's images, but it wasn't, I didn't, there was so much there in the photographs she took that it just seemed like the voices just came as they needed to. And my main concern was there'd be something dynamic. Just here's this picture and that picture. Like, to me, the picture's there. Why describe it? So
Mhm.
just let the people, and that's what she was doing for a lot of these people. She was giving them voices. So,
Exactly, she was.
let the poems do that too. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, it has a wonderful dimension to the book, all various voices. Yeah.
it's a lot of
Also,
fun.
I want to remind our listeners that there's going to be a chance to ask questions on the Radiant Press page. There's an opportunity to ask your own questions for the listening public. So, Bruce, in the Malouf film Finding Vivian Maier, a professor of linguistics calls her French accent an affectation, and you have her respond to his accusation in your lovely poem, Idiodialect of V. Could you read that poem here?
Um, okay, sure. And an idiolect is our particular way of speaking our individual way of speaking. So I was down in the Maritimes 10 years. So when I came back, I actually had a way of speech that I still recognize in myself. And so each one of us has that comes from where we've been and how we do how we
Mm-hmm.
go about our lives. And yeah, so this is Vivian's response to this. And it's not just to him, it's to all the words that all the stories that other people have laid over top of her.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is
Yeah.
on the idiolect of V. Disingenuous in that voice you exhale over your students. Professor, you denounce my vowels, too long for French. Children who know me say I speak like I'm about to sing. Maybe it's true. I've heard quite a few people singing on Maxwell Street. A cappella, there are a million ideas of language. Take a child born in New York, her mother abandoned, in a family tradition of such abandonment. The depression not yet hit bottom. She takes her daughter home to Saint Bonnet en Champsur. Under the mountain of France, the girl must construct her own floating island on the lake you call language. She pulls sounds from the air, the way birds imitate other birds, or perhaps the girls of École Rue Huitme. She's making her own girl country. And what would she choose? Carts trundling the bucolic lanes of Saint Bonnet, a green mountain pasture with sun on its steeples, or the throb of New York's gospel of market, the whole country quoting, "Oh, say, can you see," as her waters shift to questions of skin, tract houses in deserts that will not be moved, her electrified criers of blues plugged into the crosshairs of Halstead and Maxwell. How could a girl learning to speak make her way in that country, alone with that dark thing that makes her careful with men? Professor, you should know we are all a stranger to someone. As for language, I had none in Saint Bonnet, so I began to compose a little song that happened to throw its halo around me. I decided then, this is how I should speak.
Thank you so much, Bruce. That's one of my favorite poems in the collection, too.
Yeah.
Vivian took many pictures of people's legs. She said that people would happily let them take pictures of her legs when they didn't want to have their whole body pictures taken or their faces taken, which I thought was really interesting because when I looked at the pictures, those photographs of people's legs told wonderful stories. They were really quite amazing. And you have a poem where Vivian, it's called "Let Me Explain About Legs," and I wonder if you could speak about that a little bit and also read "Let Me Explain About Legs."
Okay. Um, One of the things I learned some things from having to look at the photographs and write about the individual photographs that I haven't seen talked about elsewhere. And one of them is that she has a vocabulary, like her photographs of legs are part of her vocabulary, where the part speaks for the whole person, but there's a whole, I guess, she's created her own little genre, but it's quite a deep one because it just shows how good she is that she can just take a part of a person's body and create the whole person, the whole, and
Yes,
with a story
I know, it's
along with it.
incredible. Yeah.
And but if you look, there's a whole group of pictures of legs, and so it's one of the subjects I think that fascinated her. And like as I say, she actually developed. It was part of her work very
Her
consciously.
own genre
Yeah, right.
of legs.
Yeah, I'll keep mine below the table here. But anyway, so this is let me explain about legs. Let me explain about legs. For example, this mother's grip on her daughter's shoulder. On a succinctly clipped lawn, suburban they stand, halfway into their fate. Or if you don't believe in fate, then what is to come? A girl draws herself up on tiptoes. Her fingers can't reach the postcard display. Her pink barrette, her sunny sundress can't make her taller. Her brother, her father, turn their backs. She already knows what not to ask for. Things are ignored until they disappear. This is a dictionary of their family. Two artists on plein air. The slender one's legs, the careful proportions of her body, the man with her, poised like a heavy tear with a belt cinched round its belly. Though who can say what the proportions of their lives are? Usually it's the man who is happy. Conversation is a corner. Two women in heels and one in flats. The story flows easily. The third one is anxious. Behind Givenchy's sunglasses, a fourth woman turns, nervously touches the dusky skin of her shoulder. A study in frailty and the kind of intimacy in which she will always be other. My legs, I show only to myself. I'd rather see him, the parcel he holds by the string, and how desperately he protects it. I know the story. Heelless socks, shoes like this live in the park, hang off the end of a bench or the end of a stretcher. It's not a disguise. No lovers, no fares. So the carriage driver waits at a shoe shine. No school for the boy, dipping his brush in polish. The boy is poor, the driver broke, and the horse must be looked after. Split jump over Central Park trees. Cossack dancers' arms push the walls of the temple apart. As he flashes his most disarming grin, Samson's last day must have been good. A scavenged pigeon curled by a drain, or legs of a vagrant who sleeps like a corpse from a battle, with one arm still raised. Whatever it held has escaped. Legs in tantrum, or quietly scuffing feet glimpsed in the gap under the blue line fence, shop girls and men in creased suits discreetly eyeing each other between someplace and home. Looking at legs, you see things like this, an eccentric language you think you should know. It's strange punctuation. People who hate to be photographed never argue when you take pictures of their legs, which may be bandaged or caked, a nanny clutching a squirming child, a leg in a week-old cast, singular. Legs dashing into water, mannequins and storefronts articulated to indicate their lyric gaze. Tan souls of lovers sprawled under the Willett Park boardwalk, or a family tableau at the CTA bus. We are incomplete in the manner of the Elgin marbles, all the poses of the human temple delivered in silence, like a Valentino tango, so lyrical and yet so apocryphal. Perhaps I'm a flaneur, a passionate wanderer, or an idiot, encyclopedic in the scope of her appetite, but my intention is serious. I humbly submit this anatomy of walking.
Thank you so much for that, Bruce.
I think that calls for a drink. And here's to Vivian.
Vivian spent much of her time on Maxwell Street, didn't she? And she often hauled along her charges to Maxwell Street. And as you said, I think she found her people there, that was her family. She spoke of if she had a family album, that these would be the people who knew her. So would you agree that these were her family more so maybe than any of the people that she ever was nanny to, or the family that she grew up with? the people
Sure.
on Maxwell Street
Yeah. If I
were
can
it was like home to
explain,
her.
yeah, if I can explain, the Chicago Blues were born on Maxwell Street. And the story is told in the poem, but basically there was a bazaar there every Sunday. And when it started out, it got to be as long as a mile long. And um, Jewish people moved there because when they first came to Chicago, they couldn't afford to be downtown. And this continued for years and years until finally, I believe it was in the 80s, it got smaller and smaller, and finally it was closed out and moved to a parking lot somewhere
Oh,
not far away. Um, but the Chicago Blues were born there because there were musicians there, and to be heard, they had to plug in. They had to get amplifiers and find a way to be heard above all the noise, because there was a lot of them. You can find films on Maxwell Street in the day, but she went there just about every Sunday for a number of years and took photographs. And I think what I'll do is these sections are numbered, but I'll skip that. And I think they are her people. And she starts off by saying, Sunday saves her. So this is Maxwell Street, letters from a bazaar. Sunday saves me. Maxwell and Halstead, the sizzling onions, Polish hot sausage, Vienna red hots, and these pullers working their chatter. Oh, we got shirts. Oh, we got hats for $1, sir. You look good, but a $1 hat. Very sharp, sir. Very sharp. Ma'am, how can you let him walk around without a good hat? How about socks? 4 for $1. The only hole is the one you put your foot in. A $1 hat, and I'll throw in 2 pairs of socks. You're killing me, sir. You're really killing me. Miss, look at, we got 50-cent blouses for you and your daughter. Your daughter? I thought you was sisters. Ladies, look at these seams. Any cheaper and I'd have to fire myself. You know you need gloves, miss. Miss? Not lies when everyone knows it. Just a patois that's met its master. I come early as the train can get me here. People need to make money. No time for church in any way. Maxwell has forgiven more people than St. Francis. You see their empties, Italian Swiss sherry, the creatures who drank it hide in doorways as if the sun hurts their skin. Drifters in hope of a spot in hell that's a little less worse than the day before. Sid Goldstein says when a worm crawls in a radish and he's never known anything else, then for all he knows he's in a peach. I don't believe it. They know. God, if there is one, must be a Democrat. Just look at these independent Baptists with more starch and more white in their faces than on their shirts. But there's no doubting their luminous intensity. And if it isn't coming from the Bible, then it's coming from somewhere. They claim there are angels among us. The man in the thin olive suit beside me gives me a nudge, says, I only seen angels. The only angels I know are in heaven. I never seen one. I never seen an angel on this earth, not one. I like the black choirs better. They seem to think you're already been saved. It just hasn't occurred to you yet. Your bones believe it. A voice rising out of the flesh of itself. It only wants to be what it is, singing and stomping and calling, an instrument doing its work. Louis H. Sullivan never lived here. Frank Lloyd Wright put his bungalows out in the country, not here. Jimmy's hot dog stand is open all the time, however. Lou Fish can sell you any kind of silk, and Rooftop Brown will chase a burglar through any place a human being will go. No rags to riches or pull yourself up by your secondhand bootstraps here, but Rooftop can tell you it flows. Jews who landed too poor for stores downtown, so they set up here or on Halstead, then Irish, then German, Mexicans, black with no choice. Chicago so much better than the sunny South and Jim Crow, or braqueros pulling sugar beets, picking California peaches. The defender said it was here. If you want a job, if you're having trouble with your employer, if you want a place to live. Or they came from close in. Town population 378 with no work. So change your life, go to school, fall in love and keep going. Regular stories about regular people. Nothing so tragic or noble with chapters and books running after them. Ask for the rest. Born here, lived here, died here. A kid with 20 wind up bullfrogs lined up on a box. They'll go all day, he says. Have you tried them yourself? Sure, he says. I'm here all day and they've been with me the whole time. Not sure that was the point. Talking last week to this man I usually talk to. He asks if I have 15 cents, so I give it to him. He has no socks like so many of these down and out fellows. The smell is quite rank, but still, apart from some soap and water, how are his bare feet so different than my bare feet? And I have to wonder what this same cloth is we're both supposed to be made of. Boards laid across sawhorses one day a week, piles of toilet seats, raincoats, tchotchkes, and tinny pictures of Pope Paul the Seventh. If the city doesn't shut it down, this is work, trying to make the short end of the stick a little bit longer. Better roll them dice, better roll them right. If I catch you cheating, gonna take your life. That would be Blind Arvella Gray. He's here hollering every Sunday, though he never tells his real name or tells the same story twice. First, he says he was a getaway driver for the Purple Gang and got 2 fingers shot off in a botched stick-up, which is why he only plays slide guitar. Next week, he says a jealous husband shot them off. It's just as likely the police got 1 finger and the husband got the other, but who wants to encourage such a terrible liar? A good eye. You need more than that. People who come with their cameras, that they think it's exotic. The hawkers and pullers put up with it. Attention has its uses. If I had a family album, this would be it. People who know me. The Sistine Chapel hasn't seen half the things this place has. No one wants it. Not the mayor, the police, or the Burnham plan. People made it anyway and kept it going. Suspended it from wires. Chaotic and elegant. A savant junkman's mobile art, made from parts he built himself. It moves the world when you wind it up.
People who know you, how important that is.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Okay, skipping ahead a little bit now, because you told me you wanted to have this be about 35 minutes, and we've gone past that, but I have so many questions to ask you about this book. In amongst Vivian's work were a number of Super 8 films, and the poems around those films make up the 4th section of the book. As in After the Riot, Vivian walks into the aftermath of a tornado in Tornado Woman and Slide Girls. And in these photographs, your poems reveal her eye for the ironic and, as you said, often humorous. I was wondering if you'd share those poems, and I'd like to know why you have her see a kind of consolation in Slide Girls. She talks about what she sees there as a kind of consolation for the tornado, for the aftermath.
Oh, right. Well, maybe I'll just read the Slide Girls, or what the heck. So there are 9 films, happen to be 9 films, and I for Super 8 films, and those were provided to me for the research on the book. And so this is the one about the Slide Girls. And it's taken after this set of 21 tornadoes that have just devastated the area. And there were a number of people killed out in the countryside around in Illinois and through the Midwest. And so she's out taking pictures of this woman, of this house that's been devastated. And there's a woman also with a Super 8 camera who's taking films while Vivian's taking films of her, and then she goes from there to this film she makes of the part of that film includes these girls sliding down the remains of a house. So she says, so this is Slide Girls. On the pile that was a house, two girls take turns, slide down the roof on a baby's rubber mattress, squeal and run back. Three more girls check out the ruins. What else should they do? Parents have rules for spring coats, white or gray. Mothers braid their daughters' long hair. There are no rules for this. They float above the skyline, five young swans in a backlit ballet. Being real live girls, they have to work out who's the responsible one and who will be the baby. Across town, in khaki Stetsons, two state troopers guard the remaining half of a Texaco station. They're here to make sure no one blows himself up stealing gas. Four letters left on the torn sign behind them. In the yard's shredded cosmos, a sputter of wires. No matter how strange, five girls at play is consoling. Their faith in something that wasn't meant for us, as if this were only the wind in the night. A change, nothing more than the long wait for spring. Yeah.
Thank you. To me, that consolation that that she found in the girls having fun after such a disaster was the consolation. Very much like now, I think when people are putting in gardens, it's hopeful, isn't it? There's some hope in some little girls sliding down a broken roof.
Well, that's right. And there was a book called Everything in Its Path about flooding in the Tennessee Valley, which led to some dams being built there. And what happens is people don't realize how connected they are to a physical place. And it's a very deep thing. And so it's quite a surreal scene, these girls playing on this wreckage. And I think that's part of it. It's sort of like these two realities, what was and what's here now. So it's, in a way, a child's worldview is so different than the adult's experience of all this.
Hopeful. Hopefulness. Well, I have one last question, Bruce, before we can open this up to the Q&A period for anybody listening in. You can just check on the Radiant Press website if you have a question for Bruce about his work. And the last question I have for you, Bruce, has to do with the cover of the Vivian Poems. You told me that it was going to be an impossibility to be able to include Vivian's photography in your book. So tell us a little bit about this cover image, would you?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, the timing just wasn't going to happen. It was a bit of a process getting permissions and such. But what happened was I'm friends with a photographer, with an artist, Dean Bosch, who lives down in East End, where I've been going, and a lot of my writing has happened down or as a result of visiting down there. And so I explained the dilemma. And of course, Vivian has a lot of her own shadows and herself, or her reflections and shadows, and what she's doing and this is sort of it, but this is not a Vivian picture. But what she's doing when she does that, she's inserting herself into the picture. But we're also standing where she is. So in a way, she's inserting us into the picture, the viewer into the picture as well. And so she's playing this kind of duality. And so what happened was Dean asked his wife, we're doing some work with this thing, and he asked his wife Barb to go out and take a picture, and she just happened to be wearing the same kind of coat that Vivian would be wearing. Stepped out into the backyard and took the shot. And so it's surprisingly similar. But I just want to say that a lot of Vivian's work, she does it like contrast and light and shadow are big parts of her work, as you would imagine any photographer, but especially in the format she was working in so much of her work being in black and white. But of course, there's a new book out of her color work. as well,
Yes.
because there were two boxes of films, not prints, but actual rolled up films of her color films, and
Yeah.
some of those have been started to be published and
Oh, and they're just
as well.
stunning, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, the
they're
one with the
incredible.
yellow, a fellow in a yellow shirt and somebody in yellow rain boots, and it's, yeah,
Hmm.
wonderful. But anyway, Bruce, we could talk forever about the Vivian poems, and it's just a really lovely, stunning book that's going to make you just entranced with Vivian. So please, everybody, get a copy from Radiant Press. I believe, Bruce, you've signed a number of copies for Radiant. And
I
so if you would
told
like a
them I would.
signed copy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now we'll open it up to any questions that anyone in the audience might have. So thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, Linda, and thanks, Radiant.